Hey everybody, this is Mike with On Point Preparedness. I wanted to talk about a really important concept as it applies to your walk and understanding spiritual or heavenly things amongst just the rampant amounts of deception that are going around everywhere. I use this as a foundational component anytime that I do a video, and I've been holding on to this topic for a while, and I just think at this point in time it's really important. I want to share a couple verses with you. The first is 1 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 17. For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel. And here's the key part. And not with words of eloquent wisdom, lest the cross be emptied of its power. Again, not with eloquent words of wisdom. If we think back to all the times that Jesus taught in front of large crowds, what do we think? Well, he taught very simply. He taught in parables. It wasn't just the most educated people that were following him. He had people that were lame, that were beggars, that were uneducated, people that were treated as the scum of the earth. And when we look at Matthew chapter 7, this is just perfect. It says, and when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes. Again, so the simplicity of the gospel, so that anyone from the lame person all the way to the highly educated one might understand and be astonished at how heavenly or spiritual things could be simplified so easy. And this is all very purposeful by God. He wants to show the folly in man's own thinking. That's why he chose the apostles that he did. Again, in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, we read a little bit about why he chose the people he chose. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, 26 and 27, Paul says, for consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful, not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. So now what's the real life application of this in your own life? Well, it's all centered around 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. Paul says, the natural person, the person of the world, does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are a folly to him, and he is not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned. And so there's a lot of things that we come across in this world that we understand through head knowledge, through the wisdom of men. We do this ourselves when we study the Bible. I know I've been there, and perhaps you have as well, that you feel that we're in the end of the age, time is short, and you need to get studied up on the Bible. You need to put in your hours. There's over 23,000 verses in the Bible, just within the 66 books of canon, and you're looking at it like, oh wow, I've got a lot of stuff to digest. But that's just a worldly way of thinking. Discerning spiritual or heavenly things doesn't necessarily come from the amount of time or effort that you put into reading and studying the Bible. It really and truly only comes from God. And here's an excellent example. There may be a portion of the Bible that you've read, oh geez, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 times, maybe even 100 times, and it just never clicked for you. No matter how many hours you put in, no matter how hard you concentrated, it just couldn't come to you. But then when the timing was right, particularly when you're praying for discernment and when you're having patience, something will just click. Perhaps maybe it's a pastor talking about it. Perhaps maybe it's you just reading it just like you've always read it. And just for some reason, God decides to give you that knowledge. If we look at James chapter 1 verse 5, it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. And this is the fundamental concept that I apply to all of my teaching. is that it has to be simple. It has to be able to be understood by everyone, regardless of their education. And particularly, the best teachings I've ever done were not due to my hours or length of study or how hard I've ever concentrated. It was when I was completely empowered by the Spirit, with God giving me the gift of knowledge with regards to particular things. I'm not a biblical scholar. I'm not an expert across every biblical concept or heavenly thing, but with what I am given, I talk about. Now, I don't want to wear you guys out with this topic of Torah, but it presents so many opportunities for presenting a more perfect gospel and the error that is within the Torah observance movement. And the example that I'd like to use is something that I referred to in passing several videos ago, and it refers to a ministry that's on YouTube called 119 Ministries. They are a cornerstone, if you want to use that term, of the Hebrew Roots movement. And whenever I was doing my teachings against Torah observance, I had multitudes upon multitudes of people send me their videos, and I know this is the case with others, where people are struggling to understand which way to go. The majority of people are sending them, again, 119 Ministry videos. Now I want you to take a look at this playlist that they have. It's called the Pauline Paradox playlist. And the entire intent of this playlist is essentially trying to teach people, according to their own theology, that what Paul said isn't really what Paul meant. I mean, you can just see from the titles here, Part 3, why is Paul so difficult to understand? Well, it's because you're thinking with eyes of flesh, you're not understanding him in the Spirit. The other one, Part 4, which law? That's another thing. No one really knows which laws to follow because there is no temple, not really sure what to do about sacrifices. A lot of the laws are very contrary to how we live today. And I think it's a little bit funny that many people use 119 Ministries, again, as some type of scholarly resource, and he is teaching exactly what laws to follow and how to obey the Torah. But this picture of him right on the screen, he's not even following the Torah, because if you look at Leviticus 19:27, it says, "You shall not round off the hair on your temples or mar the edges of your beard." In other words, you're not to shave your beard. Heck, if you even look at a different Torah channel, Torah Life Ministries, they're teaching about how you shouldn't shave off your beard or cut the sides of your head. And so it's utter confusion. And that's the same thing that applied to the Jewish people at that time. There was a lot of confusion with how to uphold God's law, and that's exactly why the Talmud, or the oral written traditions of the rabbis, came about. They needed more guidance. And so essentially, YouTube has become its own type of Talmud, that a lot of these folks who are not Jewish by nature, or maybe they are, and are not going to the actual Talmud, are in essence creating a Talmud unto themselves, just to understand exactly how to uphold things. And it's utterly crazy. And the one major thing that I wanted to talk about and how it ties into this whole teaching of simplicity is I tallied up the total number of minutes that they spent on this playlist, again, trying to state that what Paul said isn't really what Paul said, or isn't really what Paul meant. It was a total of nearly 12 hours of teaching. And if you have spiritual discernment, you can simplify everything that Paul has said on any given topic just within a mere couple of minutes. Take clean and unclean meats and all the teachings that I've been giving on the law and how it was fulfilled, how it was a type and shadow of spiritual or heavenly things. And when Christ came, that was revealed to us by the Spirit. Israel was living by sight. They weren't living by faith. They had to see everything. As it applies to clean and unclean meats, it was a representation of how there are some things you shouldn't eat because they're unclean, and there's some things that you should eat because they're clean. But those are things of the flesh. For it does not matter what goes into your mouth that defiles you, because it just comes out the other end. It really matters what comes out of your mouth. And so the spiritual or heavenly thing that this type and shadow is representing is that there is a true, clean, holy meat the bread of life, the meat that only Christ can give you for your soul. It's soul food. And you are to pursue those very clean and holy and righteous meats for your soul. And then there's a lot of unclean meats for your soul that you are not to pursue. The unclean meats of the world, the darkness. So boom, there you go. That's how essentially clean and unclean meats, as a type and shadow of a spiritual and heavenly thing, is discerned from a spiritual sense. Or you could spend 12 hours trying to learn that from a worldly perspective. And so I really encourage you, two different things here. For your own personal growth, try not to focus so much on the length of time or the effort or the concentration. Rather, focus on your submissiveness. Focus on prayer. Focus on patience. You may have utter submissiveness and prayer, but it may not be the right time for you. So patience, again, is a fruit of the Spirit. And if you ask earnestly, God will give you the knowledge. God will give you the knowledge. Secondly, although there are some scholars out there that are definitely Spirit-filled and they definitely have their own unique personalities and how they present information, generally, if you're finding teachers that are just overly complex, it's best just to stay away. And I think that really applies to pretty much anything, even worldly knowledge. We all talk about the teachers that we loved in high school, or if you went to college, a teacher that you loved in college, the person that could present really complex information and provide it to you correctly in a simplified fashion. That's what we want. We don't want 12 hours of teaching trying to understand Paul. And I do want to just end up saying one more thing about Paul and a lot of the Torah observance that I'm starting to see. As it regards to Paul, you actually have two camps of people in the Torah observant movement and how they view Paul. There's some, like 119 Ministries, that will start to get into the Greek and Hebrew and all these other meanings and do spiritual gymnastics to to try to say that what Paul is saying is really not what he meant, but they still view him as an apostle. But then you have some folks that look at the text and they look at what Paul has said and they cannot deny it. They're saying, wow, yeah, Paul is really saying that unclean meats can now be eaten. Or he's saying that, yeah, you shouldn't judge another person on their Sabbath day. And they actually start to reject Paul outright. They say that he is a false apostle because they can't reconcile his teachings against the Old Testament because, again, they're only looking at things from a worldly perspective. They're not discerning the types and shadows, how the New Testament fulfilled the Old, again, from a spiritual or heavenly sense. And it's just incredibly sad. So, as you're looking for teachers, you don't really even need me to tell you this. With the Holy Spirit residing in you, and if that same Holy Spirit, there's only one Holy Spirit, if that Holy Spirit is in you and that same Holy Spirit is in another person, the Spirit testifies to itself, and you'll know who is teaching you right and correct and biblical things. So I hope this helped you all. This is Mike with On Point Preparedness. God bless.